absolute worst. Rise. Today's video is brought to you by Buff. Buff is an authorized app for Overwolf, which I'm sure that you've heard of. It's completely safe and easy to use as a way to earn free stuff for playing your favorite games. They have challenges that you can complete on a bunch of different games like League, Valorant, Fortnite, Dota 2, and many more. You can stack up Buff coins just by playing. All you have to do is let it run in the background and it won't affect anything gameplay wise, no frame drops or PC slowdowns, and then you can earn Buff coins, which will help you purchase Steam cards, Riot points, game keys, hardware, and a bunch of other stuff. Like I said, super easy and safe to use, and I've been using it myself to get my favorite skins in League. You can join Buff for free today by clicking my link in the description down below. I'm going to tell you something that is probably not a secret for you. Rise is difficult to balance. Yeah, I know. Evident by his six major reworks that he has received, including mini reworks and balance changes galore, he is easily the most changed champion of all time. There's not one main reason that he constantly gets reworked, but most players have speculated the main issue is his core gameplay identity. Rise is a battle mage, which means he's somewhere in between being a burst mage or also a DPS, but not quite either of them exactly. He's a short to medium range mage that relies on machine gunning his opponents down with tons of abilities. Something about that ability spam, as well as the fact that he scales with his mana, has never really settled well into the League of Legends meta. No matter how many reworks, no matter how many times they try to get him right, they seemingly just can't do it. Either he will scale too well with his mana, allowing him to build tanky items like Frozen Heart and Rod of Ages, yet still do damage, which obviously isn't healthy, or maybe his mana scaling is on the weaker side, and it feels like it doesn't matter. Even with his struggles to become a balanced champion that they don't need to touch anymore, he has always dominated the professional scene while being a little bit abysmal for solo queue. The discrepancy between pros and elite level play versus the average player on Rise is massive. Difficult champions historically like Azir, Kalista, and Nidalee have been known to cause this problem for Riot, but Rise is different. He embodies the problem. He sort of exemplifies why this is a huge issue. In 2019, Rise was reworked for his 6th time, and we haven't seen him dominate pro play like we normally expect from him. He has still been picked here and there, just not the same. This rework on patch 9.12 would remove the shield on his Q passive and the automatic root on his W. Nowadays, in order to get the root on Rise, you have to press EW, and in compensation for these massive nerfs, the rework would give him a little bit more damage. At each rank of his ultimate for level 6, 11, and 16, he now gets increased damage on his overload pop if the enemy has an E mark. The nerfs to his survivability and lack of a shield would end up changing his playstyle. His now one shining light is that he can spam his EQ and blow enemies up. He's also a little easier to play with this iteration since his combos are not as important anymore because again, most of what you do on Rise now is just spam EQ. For this season in particular, Rise has not been the strongest. His core item that he built for over 10 years, Rod of Ages, was officially removed from the game, and with no Rod of Ages, Riftmaker would become its replacement. The only issue with Riftmaker is that it's way better for champions like Mordekaiser because it doesn't give any mana. Rise simply cannot spec into a mythic that doesn't have any mana. On top of that, his favorite item, Archangels, was a little undertuned to start the year. It ended up receiving 2 buffs, one on 10.24 and again on 11.1, and is now in a better spot. The lack of Rod of Ages means that Rise must opt for a squishier build. The 3 mage mythic items that he can build do pretty well for him. Liandry's is probably the least impactful of the 3 since he doesn't make full use of the damage, but the mythic passive does give ability haste, which he does like. Since Riot has spent a lot of this season buffing Everfrost, it's now not just good on Rise, but most AP champions as well. The additional root does give him a lot of good kiting potential as well as chasing, and it gives a little bit of health making up for the fact that he doesn't have Rod of Ages. As for direct Rise changes, he has received nothing but buffs for quite a while. On 10.6, he received some mana regeneration growth as well as some base damage on his rune prison. On 10.8, some more base stats as well as overload bonus movement speed increased. On 10.13, again, more base stats. On 10.20, overload base damage increased. On 11.1, his main damaging ability that he maxes first now, which is his Q, again mana cost lowered from 40 at all ranks, now 40 scaling down to 32. With all of these little buffs here and there, why is Ryze still sitting at the worst win rate in the game? What is causing him to be so pathetically low even for his Ryze standards? I'm definitely not saying that we expect him to have a 50% win rate, but surely he's better than this, right? Well, I set out on a quest to find out. Some of you may know that I am a longtime Ryze enthusiast. I absolutely love this champion, and across 7 years of playing this game, I have around 300 or 400 games of Ryze, and I'm not entirely convinced that he's in one of his worst spots ever. I was determined to figure out what makes him good, what are his strengths that can help you hard carry games, as well as what are his weaknesses that make you lose games so bad that you contribute to the terrible win rate.
Hey, I'm Joey, and I'm one of the 30 AI voices from SpeechLab. You listened to this video until now and you probably couldn't tell I'm not a real human voice. That's because I understand exactly what each phrase is saying.
After my little Ryze experiment, I picked up on a couple of key notes. The first and most important is that Ryze's playstyle for a very long time now has been different from what veteran players think he's supposed to be. We often like to associate Ryze with items like Frozen Heart, and in fact, Frozen Heart is being buffed on 11.11 here. But unless they are literally a 5 AD team, I don't think Frozen Heart is a good Ryze item. He is far more of a burst mage with a little bit longer cooldowns these days. Your job is to blow up anyone who walks in your medium range. You have a few ways to do this, but the main goal for Ryze now should be to build as much AP as possible. Firstly, with your EQ, you need to be looking to one-shot squishy champions, which with enough AP is entirely possible. Your biggest disadvantage is the lack of range and defensive tools without a shield anymore. You simply cannot deal with enemy threats jumping on you. This would force Ryze to build squishier, so you don't really have a choice but to steer into the skid, not away from it. Recently, Death Cap had its cost reduced, and it's a core Ryze item. Under all circumstances, you should be looking to build Death Cap 3rd or 4th. The cool thing about Ryze is that he gets a lot more value out of Death Cap than some of the other AP champions in the game because of his passive. His passive grants him bonus mana based on his AP. The actual numbers are per 100 AP, he will get 5% more mana. This is huge for him, as each one of his abilities scale with AP and bonus mana. The amount of damage gained from your Mythic into Archangels into Death Cap is nearly impossible to pass up, and sometimes make me wonder, even if I'm playing against a full AD team, if I should just skip Zhonya's and go right for the Death Cap. Because your root is not guaranteed anymore, it's also not feasible to play Ryze unless you can kill somebody without your absolute max damage combo. Let me explain. In order to root someone, you must press E then W, which is totally fine and does allow you to pop your runes, gaining some movement speed as well if you press Q, but the amount of damage lost by not being able to press EQ is huge. However, after 3 items with the Glass Cannon build, you can either Q EWQ or even just EWQ and nearly kill them inside the root. By building so much more AP, you give yourself the chance to have insane farming numbers. You can clear waves faster, as well as jungle camps. And in fact, there's a league meme based around Ryze's farming. Doinb Ryze hack.
I was like really strong this game, so I really wanted to invade as many camps as possible, and I think sometimes they went a bit too far. I was trying to do the Doinb hack CS, but it didn't really work out, unfortunately.
This all started after Doinb, the Season 9 World Champion mid laner, did something which seems nearly impossible. In solo queue, he got 400 CS at only 24 minutes. Everyone started memeing on this after there were YouTube videos and titles, probably trying to clickbait people, calling it a Doinb Ryze hack, using Chinese writing as well, making you probably think that he was cheating because you don't understand what it says. And then in reality, if you watch the gameplay, his jungler did let him take nearly all of his camps and blue buffs, and he just kept farming over and over again. Regardless, it was still very impressive, and just because this was an extreme outlier doesn't mean we can't learn from it. A better example of how you can realistically apply it to your gameplay is by looking at a game that MidBeast did a nice review on. In this game, he showed us all how Doinb gets 10 CS per minute on Ryze. If you want to play this champ, it is mandatory that you farm well and efficiently use your EQ to push waves and minions as well as take jungle camps. Hopefully you can be fed enough to take enemy camps and not always your own junglers. I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't take your own jungler's camps because he's probably trolling and it's probably a huge jungle diff, but hey, you didn't hear it from me, man. Anyway, with such a potent farmer like Ryze, you need to really try to get 8 CS per minute or more. If you can't hit that number consistently, you simply are not able to utilize one of his big strengths. As stated earlier, the need to really try to get 8 CS per minute or more. If you can't hit that number consistently, you simply are not able to utilize one of his big strengths. As stated earlier, the build that I preferred the most was Luden's first, but there really is merit for the other options. The biggest drawback compared to going Everfrost is not necessarily the loss of the active, but rather the health. What I do like about Luden's though is the mini phase rush that you get on proc. On patch 11.6, Luden's was given a small buff that reduces the cooldown when you hit enemy champions, and for a champion like Ryze, who wants to throw a lot of spells at the enemy, that's perfect. The wave clear that it gives plays into the idea of getting more CS, and you're likely to build on Ryze either lucidity boots or defensive boots like Mercs or Tabbies, so it means that you can't go for Sorks. Having no flat pen whatsoever on mages feels really bad, so Luden's helps to fix that problem. It gives 6 flat pen once you get it, as well as the mythic passive, giving you an additional 5 per item. For full transparency, the pros have adopted the Everfrost setup and seem to prefer it substantially, so you should probably trust their judgment more than mine. As I said, Everfrost is definitely good, and after your mythic, just go ahead and complete that Archangels, then Deathcap or Void situationally depending on which one you need first, and then again a situational defensive item or utility. Things like Cosmic Drive, Rylai, Zhonya's, Banshees, or even QSS all work well for Ryze. Is this build going to be squishy? Yes, very squishy. Is it harder to position? Yeah, it definitely is, but after testing, I think it's the only way to carry games in solo queue. For your rune page, Phase Rush is still the go-to keystone. While it did get nerfed on the previous patch, the thing about these Phase Rush changes is that they only affect the early game. The cooldown was buffed come late game. This does hurt during the early game when you need to escape ganks or run someone down in the jungle, but I don't think you mind it too bad on Ryze, given that he can already kite around more and more when it scales up, so that's when it matters most anyway. So far this season, we have seen Ryze holding up decently well in professional play, not as broken or overtuned as previous seasons where he was widely picked, but not his worst either. We've seen 201 bans total across all regions, as well as 289 picks, with a presence of 15%. Of course, if you only sort by top 5 regions, he's picked quite a bit less, but that's just because there's less games total. He holds a very similar presence in those as well. As for pros who have performed well on him, you should look no further than Caps. Caps has played Ryze 3 times this season, and he won all 3 of those games. His best performance came against Astralis, where he did opt for the Luden's in full AP setup, as he showed us that in the right situation, Ryze can still destroy the pro level.
Stop sleeping with earbuds in your ears. These type of headphones cause lifelong damage to your ears and even hearing.
I think what I wanted to try to find out the most in this investigation for Ryze is simply, did anything change for him? Is any of this different than his usual? At this point, I think we know that his solo queue win rate is going to be bad. We know that he can still do well in pro play, and we know that he is probably going to get reworked again next week. So, did I find anything deeper here? I think to some degree, yeah, I did. I don't think that Ryze is top tier. That would be absurd to even hint at. But I don't believe he's the worst champion in the game either, especially for solo queue. Despite his bad win rate, you can make him work decently well, you just have to take the correct steps. I recommend banning Zed, not that I would, know anything about that, or anything, You should probably build full AP or nearly full AP. Don't be afraid to move into the enemy jungle to take camps. Be a little selfish by stealing blue buffs and asking for them from your jungler, and focus on side laning no different than a Tryndamere or Fiora would. You seriously have a good win condition with him. Almost no other champions can match his mid-range DPS and burst come late game. Although nerfed, he still technically has completely point-and-click CC, and you can still shove waves and contest jungle fights if you need to early game. Just be very careful with your mana conservation. Wave clear is never a problem for him, and he is easier to play now than he used to be in the past, since EQ spam is really easy to do. With everything that I have learned, I will give him a solid yet reasonable rating of B tier. He's not as OP in solo queue as Fiddlesticks, Shaco, Urgot, Shen, Talon, or Zed, and he's not played as much in pro play as Rumble, Morgana, Kai'Sa, or Leona, but he has a real place in this game in my opinion. Ryze main should not be too worried about his current state, especially since Riot has proven this season that they have no problem buffing him. They are willing to do so. But anyway, these are just my thoughts and feelings. Please feel free to let me know in the comments down below if you agree or disagree. How do you feel about Ryze right now? Do you even ever see him in solo queue? Because, you know, you probably don't. And if you enjoyed the content and the editing on these videos and would love to support me, please check out my Patreon. I have video editing tutorials on the Patreon, as well as a way to support the channel in general. I really do my best to try to release high quality content at a reasonable pace, so I hope that that shows. Anyway, thank you guys so much, and I will see you next time. It's pretty fair to say that everyone hates assassins. When you get one shot in this game, it feels like there was absolutely nothing you could have done. Maybe you could have built resistances and positioned closer to your teammates, but when a champion can come out of stealth, kill you instantly, and then re-enter stealth to escape, that sounds like it would be a nightmare to play against, and truth be told, it kind of is. However, that gameplay pattern has not stopped one champion from having one of the most interesting histories in all of League of Legends. He's gone through many different iterations, with each build and style having their own unique feeling. He's maxed different abilities, he's used all of his evolves at one point or another, and even swapped roles. From being the most terrifying mid lane assassin that League of Legends has ever seen, to a bruiser jungler used in competitive play because of the utility on his slow, this is the ever-evolving story of Kha'Zix. These champion documentaries take a really long time to make and would not be possible without the support of awesome sponsors. And with Season 11 in full swing, the absolute best place to gain elo is with pro guides. The hardest part about getting good coaching is finding one, and pro guides has made that process incredibly simple. Ranking up in League of Legends is really hard to do by yourself, and sifting through countless hours of pro player VODs of their solo queue games, grinding all by yourself, and watching replays to keep up to date with meta builds, it can be tough. Let me show you how quick this is with their on-demand coaching feature. It's over here just like a friends list, and it will show you which coaches are online or currently in a session. Clicking on any of the coaches will give you a breakdown on all of their critical information, like the reviews from other sessions, the champions they play, their rank, and a little bit about them. They have tons of options that let you get exactly the learning method that you want. Now there's nothing stopping you from gaining elo, so just sign up with Pro Guides using the link in the description down below, and go message a coach. It'll take less than 30 seconds to get into a coaching session. Thank you so much to Pro Guides for the sponsor.
Ново Parodontax Herbal Fresh с екстракти от билки за усещане на чистота и свежест. 4 пъти по-ефективна в премахването на плака в сравнение с обикновена паста за зъби.
League of Legends in 2021 is very different from the game that it used to be more than 10 years ago. You probably already knew that. With a new patch of changes every 2 weeks and a new season every single year, it means League of Legends changes and evolves all the time, just like Kha'Zix. But one way that it hasn't changed all that much over the last several years is around the metagame of roles. We have this idea that it has to be so structured, where we need a top laner who will take teleport, that way he can move around the map and leave his lane. We have a jungler who must take smite and needs to gank and farm the jungle. We have a mid lane mage or assassin whose job it is to not only kill his lane but move around the map as well. And then we have a bottom lane duo of an AD carry marksman and support. Seems so odd that it's so perfected, but it didn't always exist that way. In the very early days of League of Legends, players and champions would just go wherever they saw fit, wherever seemed the best for that lane matchup, and it mostly worked just fine. This had a huge impact on Riot's champion design philosophy, and if you look at some of the older champions in League of Legends, there's a reason why still to this day Tryndamere's E has a big AP scaling, even when the rest of his kit is entirely centered around building physical damage and crit. It's not exactly clear why this would be the case until you know more about the history of the game. Tryndamere was designed long ago for a very different meta, where Riot was not trying to force any typical builds on champions. They wanted you to try building AD or AP Tryndamere. Take him mid, bot, top, doesn't matter. Just try a bunch of stuff until you find something that's not only fun, but actually works too. As this game started changing and teams realized more and more that the best strategy was to have a proper jungling champion, a duo bottom lane, and 2 solo laners, Riot would have to switch up their philosophy and adapt with the rest of the game. Instead of an unstructured, free-flowing way of making champions, they could take advantage of it and start making champions for specific roles. Right around the time that Kha'Zix was in development, the meta became solidified and Kha'Zix would be one of the first ever champions designed to be a jungler. Riot talks about this in their champion design notes by saying Kha'Zix is a flexible jungle assassin who excels at surprising enemy champions and quickly dealing massive burst damage. Moreover, his unique evolution gameplay allows him to adapt to different enemy team comps and strategies by customizing his abilities over the course of the match. The staple of Kha'Zix's design is the evolutions, and this was decided to be in his kit at the very beginning and would influence the rest of his design, all the way down to his art, his animation, his voice, and his story. They say that the core idea was a guy that evolves and he can mutate over the course of the match, and they wanted to capture that gameplay the best that they could because it was a strong and compelling idea. The development of Kha'Zix is one of the most important points in League of Legends history and for Riot themselves, because he was by far at the time the most complicated champion they were ever going to make. It's likely that they began working on him around late 2011 and early 2012, and because of that, if you compare him to the rest of the champions during that time, they were far more simple than he is. The first and most important question for this kit was to figure out how the design would actually go for the evolutions. So what is evolution going to actually mean? Well, there was a ton of possibilities in different directions that they could take it. When would you upgrade? How would you upgrade? Would you be picking one evolution from a first and top tier, and then another from a second tier? How is it going to work? The key distinction that they ended up making was that the evolutions would be all centered around his assassin type playstyle, and the evolutions would not have the player pick between being a bruiser, a tank, or an assassin. They decided that Kha'Zix was going to fulfill this assassin role, and you would pick from several different fun, cool assassin tricks for him to evolve, and ultimately that seemed more focused and fun rather than having him pick between a fighter Kha'Zix, a tank Kha'Zix build, or an assassin Kha'Zix build. It seemed too broad doing it that way. As far as his Void theme, he also didn't start as a Void character. Instead, he was just a praying mantis type monster, but the Void theme would end up fitting so well with the story that they wanted him to consume things. They wanted him to become the ultimate predator. The rivalry that he has with Rengar wasn't there from the very beginning, but because they were both hunting type champions and they drew tons of inspiration from Alien vs Predator, it just kind of worked out in the end. Because of his complexity and how unique he was for the era back in 2012, it would present some brand new challenges for Riot that they hadn't faced before, and one of the immediate ones was to make sure that the evolutions weren't just tied to the skill that you max out. You don't want to have it so that the first ability that you rank up has to always be the one that you evolve. There's actually a lot of situations in which you wouldn't want to do that. Being able to make a separate choice was extremely important from a gameplay standpoint, because otherwise the evolutions don't really add anything. It's just like, oh, if you rank up your Q, you evolve your Q. Instead, you can come up with a unique build where you might evolve your E first and get your wings, but of course the best ability to max is the Q. They also found him extremely hard to balance in their personal playtesting sessions because unlike a traditional character where you have 4 active abilities that you need to balance, instead you have 4 abilities in concert with 4 evolutions. The final thing they wanted to do was to make sure if the gameplay department and his kit was going to be the most complicated they had ever made, to not then slack off in other parts of his design as well. They say that at the time a champion averaged around 22 different animations, but this champion had about 40 during his design, and they also doubled the amount of animators working on him. Instead of just 2 animators, they actually put 4. With his base kit and theme finally wrapped up and ready to be released, there was only one more thing to do, which was to make his release skin. And a very interesting thing about that skin, Mecha Kha'Zix, is that it was thought to be the most popular skin before the release of Elementalist Lux, which is to say that for several years it was the most purchased skin. This is pretty understandable because not only was Kha'Zix super popular and a lot of fun to play, but also this skin had even more voice lines and animations, which was a lot more rare at the time. Because of the high bar that he set for champion design, it would mean that his skin would have to reflect that as well. It was the first ever release skin to be priced at 1350 RP. With everything wrapped up and ready to go, Kha'Zix would hit the Rift in September of 2012. Kha'Zix has always had these 4 main abilities that we all know now, but over the years he has gone through a lot of minor changes, and his release is no exception to that, as the release version of the champion had a few differences. The main thing to note is that his R gave damage reduction while in stealth. Keep that in mind because it will be important later on. Also, on his evolved claws, he had execute damage based on the target's missing health. Yeah, a lot of people don't know that he used to have this in his kit because it didn't exist for very long. It would be removed a little while later. The general impression right away is that he was decent for the solo lanes, and specifically top lane, even though he was designed for the jungle. Because of his isolation damage, it made his top lane 1v1s quite powerful, and a popular build for top lane Kha'Zix back in the day was using tier/mirror mana. This tier would help you constantly poke with your W. As for jungle Kha'Zix, a common build at the time was Brutalizer into Last Whisper for maximum pen. Both of those items were super efficient and OP as well during those days.